Alrighty tighty folks, welcome back to the channel. Today on But It Runs, I'm going to be replacing the reverse light connector that the wire broke in on the Civic. I haven't had reverse lights in this car for 2 years now, and I kind of want my reverse lights back. So, let's get into it. Now we've got here the reverse light connector on the reverse light switch. I've moved it up to the side so you can kind of see the type of connector that it is. And the switch is fine. The connector on the body, however, the wire has broken off of. And that guy is right down here underneath the distributor. There's a wire harness that comes out to the side of the head there and feeds the coolant temperature sensors and the reverse light switch. And you can see right there that wire just broken right out of the connector, right at the connector. Now this is a common problem for vehicles of this age, and in particular Hondas of this age, because of just where the connectors sit. So I went to Corsa Technic. I got me some replacement connectors, the Sumitomo guys, and they come with new seals, new pins, new connector bodies, the whole schmagoigle. And we're going to replace that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to also replace some of the wire. I've got my box of wire harness here. I've been robbing wire harnesses from the junkyard for a number of years, and I've got me a nice little collection of wires here. So we're going to bring them into the front of the garage, in front of the car here, and we're going to figure out which one it is. Wire harnesses are like Christmas lights. They're hard to untangle. Now to figure out what the wire colors I will need I will use the book. After I figured out the wire colors, I found the harness that I needed, and I just started cutting away at the insulation there. And like I said a minute ago, this is a pretty common failure on most cars of this age and older, where you get wires that the insulation dry rots, or it just breaks down after so many years of heat cycling, and it becomes brittle, and you sometimes get corrosion on the conductors. You can see here I'm checking the wire for where the wire insulation is good. To get down to the wires that I needed to get to, I had to remove the airbox and the upper radiator hose from the engine, and then a couple of smaller bypass hoses connected to the head to get myself enough purchase. Now I could have removed the distributor and made this job quite a bit easier, but that O-ring on the distributor likes to leak, and I figured it's not leaking right now, might as well just leave it in place. So we left him on there, and I just kind of pulled the wire harness out to the side a little bit. All the clips have broken off a long time ago from the clips that hold it in place along the engine and the various brackets around the inside of the engine bay there. So the wire harness moves around pretty easily. Probably part of the reason the wire broke in the first place was the wire harness has too much room to move on its own. So we get everything out of the way, and I start separating out the wires. I couldn't find my wire strippers that day. I ended up finding them about 2 weeks later, but I couldn't find them on this day, so I used my pocket knife there. It's fine. Been doing this for a while. I don't tend to nick conductors when I strip them with a pocket knife, so. You can see here we just kind of twist the wires together, get us a little tiny bit of flux, and I use lead-free solder almost exclusively because, I don't know, I like it better. And when soldering wires together, you're not welding. It is very much a chemical bond as opposed to a mechanical bond, where the solder actually chemically bonds to the copper of the conductor of the wires. So you want that solder to wick up into the wires as best as you can get it to, but you also don't want to leave the heat on too much. This isn't a soldering tutorial. If you guys want a soldering tutorial, let me know, and I'll make a little tutorial. I've got some PCBs and wiring and various odds and ends. I can show you guys some soldering tutorial stuff. But when I got down in here, I discovered, to my great chagrin, that another wire had broken. You can see me there fiddling with the other connector. That one is the coolant temperature sensor for the ECU. Funnily enough, the signal was working. The signal to the ECU was functional, and the engine was running fine, but when I went to pull the connector off the sensor to give myself more purchase on the wire harness, same thing, the wire broke right at the connector. Luckily, it's the same connector. And every time I buy connectors, every time I buy whatever, I always buy extra, just in case. You never know. So I had the ability to fix that guy. I went back into the harness and I cut those bits out where I got extra wiring for the ECT sensor. But you can see here, I didn't play with the focus. I had manual focus on, so we don't get really good images of me putting these wires in the connector. But I made me a pigtail with nice clean wires with good insulation, and I even added a few extra inches to the harness overall for these connectors, just so there would be less stress on them. The factory wire harness, the way that Honda wrapped it up with the split loom and electrical tape and what have you, the securement, the connectors kind of have, the wires at the connectors kind of have a bunch of stress on them that they really don't need to have, especially when you get to a point like in this car where all the clips have broken and the wire harness just kind of dangles from connectors, really. I've done my best to keep as many of the connectors intact as possible, but half of them are broken or missing, and finding replacements has been a little bit difficult. So I figured I'd just add a couple extra inches to take the stress off of these, primarily the ECT sensor, which is critical for engine function. The computer doesn't know how much fuel to add on top of the base map if you don't have that sensor. So without it, on a hot engine, you'll have way too much fuel, and on a cold engine, you probably won't have enough. It depends on how the ECU is set up, and when the sensor gets removed, exactly what the signal does when it floats. But you can see I don't add a whole lot of heat to the wires for very long. It's 10, 15, 20 seconds total, and that is more than I really feel comfortable with. Right here, I didn't have enough light. I don't have enough light in the garage, so I had to bust out the flashlight and attach it to the hood there with the magnet. Push the heat shrink down. I always put far more heat shrink than I really need on automotive connections, just because I really don't want anything getting into that connection and corroding the wires prematurely. So I always put more heat shrink than I need. I'm not going to say there's no such thing as too much heat shrink, but in this case, there's really no such thing as too much heat shrink. Too much would be you can't move it up the wire enough, and when you're soldering the wire, just the heat on the wire is enough to shrink it onto the wire, and you can't move it. You can see there I put some dry lube in that connector because these connectors are old, and the connector on the switch is old, and it's got, you know, some debris or some dry rot or some whatever in it that would make the connector harder to connect. So I always put a little bit of lube in there, let it dry for a second, and then put the connector together. Also makes it easier later for removing. So we're just going to finish up reattaching the last of these 4 wires that I had to put back together. And that will be it for this video. I just wanted to show you guys kind of things you can expect on older cars, especially older EFI cars that have a number of connectors. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and like the end card says, like it, subscribe it, crank it, rip it. We'll see you in the next one.